Her scream never reached the sky. The wind stole it first, carrying it across the empty salt flats like a prayer too late to be heard. By the time I saw her, she was just a flicker of motion against the white horizon, a woman running where no one should ever run alone. Dust clung to her hair, blood on her sleeve, and 3 men rode behind her like shadows that refused to fall back. There are moments out here quiet, merciless moments when a person's whole life balances on the width of a horse's hoof print. I knew, the second I saw her stumble, that this was one of them, and I knew something else too. Someone had tried to steal her freedom, and she'd chosen to run anyway. The kind of choice that tells you everything about who a person really is. The kind that changes the road for everyone who crosses it. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe now. Let's begin. The wind carried a thin, sharp whistle as it skimmed across the wide salt flats, dragging long ribbons of dust that glittered red in the dying sun. Evening was settling over the Silver Basin, the kind of evening where shadows stretched for miles, and every sound seemed to travel farther than it should. Evelyn Hart bent low over the saddle, urging her mare onward, though the poor thing's breath rattled like a bellows left too long in the fire. The salt crust shone so bright it stung the eyes. Even with the sun sinking behind the western ridge, the ground threw back a pale, ghostly light. It made everything look washed out, sky, earth, hope. Evelyn's hair had long slipped free from its pins, blown wild by the desert wind. It snapped behind her like a torn battle flag. Her fingers tightened around the fraying strap of the satchel slung across her shoulder. Inside, wrapped in a cloth she'd stitched with shaking hands, lay her brother's final letter, the only thing she had taken when she fled. She could feel the paper through the leather, worn soft from his hands, edges bent from being hidden too many times. A letter that could damn a man and perhaps save a few others. A letter worth killing for. Behind her, hooves pounded the salt with the steadiness of a war drum. She didn't need to turn. She'd heard the rhythm for the last 3 miles, 3 horses, fresher than hers, gaining ground. The mining camp didn't send men who tired quickly. They sent men who were used to dragging bodies out of shafts, men who obeyed orders even when those orders stank of blood. The wind shifted and brought their voices with it, laughing, confident. They knew she was failing. Evelyn bent lower. "Come on, girl. Just a little more," she whispered to the horse. She wasn't sure if she was talking to the animal or herself. The mare stumbled. It wasn't much, just a hitch of the front leg, but it sent a shock through Evelyn's chest. The ground here was treacherous, thin crust giving way in patches to soft brine mud beneath. One wrong step could cripple a horse. She loosened her grip on the reins, trying to give the mare freedom to find steadier footing. But the hooves behind her were closer now. She heard the jingle of tack, the low grunt of a rider shifting weight. A man's voice called out too close. "There she is. Don't let her slip past the ridge." Evelyn's breath came sharp and shallow. She nudged the mare, but the poor creature's legs trembled. The saddle creaked under Evelyn's shifting weight. And then, with a soft, pained cry, the horse's front legs buckled. Evelyn flew. She hit the salt with a thud that knocked the world sideways. Grit filled her mouth. The sky spun pale blue, smeared with streaks of orange. For a moment she lay still, stunned, cheek pressed against cold earth that tasted like iron and bitterness. A groan escaped her as she forced herself upright. The mare lay on her side, breathing hard, not dead, but spent, done. Evelyn ran a trembling hand down the horse's neck. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." Boots hit the ground behind her. She rose slowly, every muscle screaming. Her knees wobbled, but she didn't fall. She brushed salt from her skirt, lifted her chin, and faced them. 3 men approached. The one in front, broad shoulders, sunburned nose, a beard that couldn't hide his sour mouth, wore the look of someone who'd dragged many unwilling folks back where they didn't want to go. His hat brim cast his eyes in shadow, but she could feel the cold in them just the same. He smiled like a man greeting a runaway dog. "Evenin', Miss Hart. Long way from camp, aren't you?" Evelyn said nothing, her hand pressed against the satchel. The man's eyes flicked to it. He clicked his tongue. "No use holdin' tight to that scrap of paper. Boss wants it back, same as he wants you." The 2 other riders circled slightly, boots crunching on the brittle ground. One spat. The other adjusted his belt to rest his palm closer to his revolver. They were relaxed, confident, too confident. The leader stepped closer, dust swirled at his ankles. He reached out and wrapped thick fingers around her forearm. "Time to come home, Miss Hart." The grip was iron. It burned. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat, a mix of fear and fury climbing fast up her spine. She jerked her arm back. He held firm. She tried again, harder. His fingers dug in. "Don't make it worse," he said softly, almost kindly. "You ain't got the legs to run anymore." Evelyn's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She tried to twist away, but the wind shoved dry salt into her eyes, blinding her. She coughed, stumbled, felt him drag her 1 step closer. Her hand brushed the edge of her boot, empty. She'd lost her small knife in the fall. The world shrank to his fingers, digging into her arm, the breathless pain in her ribs, the hooves behind them, and the hopeless, endless, white, stretching on all sides. The desert didn't care about her. The wind didn't care. The world would swallow her scream before it left her lips. She blinked salt from her lashes and met his gaze with one of her own fearful, yes, but still hers. "I'm not going with you," she whispered. The man tightened his grip. A gust of wind swept across the flats, carrying a sound that didn't belong, a distant metallic clack. Sharp as flint striking steel. The captors froze. Evelyn turned her head slightly, her vision blurred with dust. But someone stood far down the trail, where the road narrowed between 2 pale ridges. A lone rider. Motionless. Silhouetted in the red dying light, she couldn't see his face, only the shape of him, hat brim low, shoulders squared, rifle resting across his saddle horn. A chill moved through the men. She felt the leader's fingers slacken just a fraction. The wind quieted, as if the whole basin held its breath. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the weight of everyone who had ever tried to control her life, a small spark lifted its head and whispered, "Maybe." The man gripping her arm swallowed hard, because the rider in the road did not look like he planned to move aside. Not for them. Not tonight. The first sound wasn't the rider's voice. It was the shot. A single rifle round cracked across the basin, echoing off the salt like a shout thrown into a canyon. The bullet struck the ground just inches from the leader's boot, sending up a small fan of white shards. The man jerked backward, startled, his grip on Evelyn's arm slipping. She staggered free. Wind tugged her hair across her face as she blinked at the horizon, heart thundering. The world was nothing but red sky, white earth, and the faint shape of a horse and rider standing alone in the narrow throat of the trail. Then a voice carried on the wind, calm, low, and impossibly steady. "She said she ain't going with you." The captors shifted nervously. A silence settled over them, deep as dusk, settling on a graveyard. Evelyn's breath grew shallow. She couldn't see his face, but something in that stillness twisted the air around them. The leader spat to the side and tried to recover his bravado. "Who the hell are you?" Dust rolled in lazy circles around the lone rider's boots. He nudged his horse forward just enough for the light to catch the edge of his coat, the barrel of his rifle. The animal, a dun gelding with a scar along its flank, stood like a carved statue. "Don't matter who I am," he said. "You heard her?" The men exchanged looks. The one with the dark vest dropped his hand toward his revolver, but didn't draw. The third shifted uneasily, toeing the salt with his boot. It was the kind of unease men felt when they realized the land itself isn't on their side. Evelyn wiped grit from her lips. A strange calm settled over her. Not safety, not yet, but the presence of something unshakable, something that did not bend to the threats of the world. The leader barked out a laugh, but it rang hollow. "Look, friend, this ain't any of your concern. Our boss wants the girl back at camp. She ran off. She's company property." The rider didn't respond. He didn't even blink, just sat there, tall in the saddle, hat brim hiding most of his face except for the set of his jaw. Broad shoulders under a worn trail coat, boots scuffed from too many miles, rifle resting easy across his arm like it was part of him. The wind hissed over the flats. Finally he spoke, voice softer but sharper for it. "You got till I count to 3 to step away from her." The leader scoffed. "There's 3 of us, and 1 of you." The rider lifted the rifle and cocked it with a slow, unhurried motion. The click echoed like a promise. 1. The 2 men flanking the leader stiffened. The one on the left muttered, "Boss, I think we know him." Evelyn swallowed hard. The leader turned sharply. "What do you mean?" The man wet his lips. "Back in the territory. Army scout. Clay. Jonah Clay. He's the one folks said tracked that Apache raider band for 70 miles. Through the mountains alone." The leader hesitated. He looked again at the figure on the horse, the way he sat, the way he didn't move more than he needed to, the way danger seemed to settle on him like a second coat. The rider spoke again, patient as the desert night. 2. A tremor rippled through the group. The third man took a step back, then another. His courage had slipped through his fingers like dried salt. The leader cursed. "We ain't done, girl. You can't run forever." He jerked his head at his companions, and they backed up toward their horses. Dust rose as they mounted, though none dared turn their backs fully on the man blocking the trail. "Boss'll hear of this," the leader shouted, trying to sound braver than he felt. "Hear of you too." Jonah Clay didn't answer. He didn't have to. The men rode off, retreating into the haze like figures swallowed by firelight, even after they were only specks on the northern flats. Evelyn felt their presence lingering in the salt air. Her knees gave way. She would have hit the ground if not for a pair of hands calloused, warm, hesitant, catching her by the elbows. Jonah swung down from his horse fast, but not loudly. He moved like a man who'd spent years making every step count. "Easy," he murmured. Evelyn tried to speak, but her throat clenched. Salt, fear, exhaustion, everything knotted together. She managed only a rasp. They were going to, I know. He helped her stand straight, though he barely touched her, just enough to steady her without crowding. His hands trembled once, then grew still. Up close, she saw more of him. Lines at the corners of his eyes from sun and sleepless nights. a day's stubble, darkening a jaw that had seen too much grit and too many heartaches. His coat was dusty, but cared for. His boots were old, but well mended. Everything about him spoke of a man who lived with purpose, but no comfort. "You hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, though her ribs ached and her legs shook like reeds. "My horse. She's done for." He glanced toward the fallen mare, jaw tightening. Shame. Good animal. The wind swept over them, cool and dry. Evelyn backed away a step, hugging her arms close. She didn't know this man, didn't know why he'd helped, didn't know what he wanted. But she knew this. His presence cut through her terror like a knife through cloth. "You shouldn't have interfered," she whispered. Jonah Clay looked at her, then truly looked. His eyes were a shade between hazel and earth, steady in a way that felt like shelter. "They touch you again," he said softly. "They'll answer for it." Her breath hitched. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't boast. It was simply the truth. Jonah turned his face toward the horizon where the three riders had vanished. "They'll be back," he added. "Men like that always try twice." Evelyn drew the satchel closer to her chest. The sky dimmed, colors softening into twilight. Fear crept cold across her skin again. Jonah stepped aside and nodded toward his horse. "We need to move," he said. "Night's comin', and this whole basin's a bad place to be caught alone." She hesitated. Trust didn't come easily anymore. She'd seen too much, lost too much, but the wind was rising, and the salt was turning silver beneath the fading light, and she knew what waited if she stayed. His hand rested gently on the reins, the invitation quiet, never forced. For a heartbeat, they stood there, two strangers in a land vast enough to swallow whole lives. Then Evelyn exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding, and stepped toward him. The night waited around them, wide and uncertain. The shack looked ready to fold in on itself. A lonely timber frame with two walls sagging inward, leaning like tired men who'd seen too many winters. It stood beside what used to be a lake, now nothing more than a cracked bowl of pale mud stretching into the dusk. Whatever water had lived there had long since walked off the earth. Jonah led his horse under the warped doorway and tied him to a beam that had once held a lantern. Evelyn followed, cautiously, her hands still trembling from the chase. The boards creaked beneath her boots. "This place safe?" she asked. "As any place out here?" Jonah struck a match and touched it to a pile of sagebrush and half-rotten wood. The fire caught slow at first, then breathed itself into a soft amber glow, pushing shadows to the shack's corners. Outside, coyotes yipped across the flats, thin, lonely sounds drifting like prayers that never quite reached heaven. Evelyn eased herself down beside the fire. She hadn't realized her legs were shaking until they folded under her. Jonah didn't comment. He simply adjusted the fire with the calm of a man who found peace in practical tasks. For several minutes, neither spoke. The flames whispered. The wind sifted through the cracks in the boards. Somewhere in the distance, a nightbird called out once, then again. Jonah settled near the doorway. One knee bent, his rifle across his lap, not threatening, not tense, just present, like a stone that knew its place in the riverbed. Evelyn hugged the satchel to her chest, the worn leather pressing against her cheek. She breathed in its familiar smell and tried to slow her heartbeat. "You said they'd be back," she murmured. "They will," Jonah answered. "But not tonight. They'll think on it first. Cowards always need thinkin' time." His tone wasn't cruel, just factual. The desert had long ago scraped the softness from his voice. Evelyn nodded. The firelight painted her face in flickers fear, strength, exhaustion, each one passing like clouds over the moon. How'd you know? I wasn't trouble, she asked. Jonah shrugged lightly. Trouble don't run like you ran. He paused. Trouble don't cry into the wind either. Her cheeks warmed, embarrassment mixing with gratitude. She turned her face away, hoping the shadows would hide both. Another long silence settled in. It wasn't awkward, just heavy with things. Neither knew how to say. Finally, Evelyn spoke, voice soft. I worked in a field hospital during the war. Jonah didn't look up, but his attention sharpened like a man listening for a distant rider. She continued, fingers worrying the edge of the satchel strap. I was 20 when they first put a scalpel in my hand. 20 when I started holding boys steady as surgeons cut bullets from them. Her breath trembled. Some were 17. Some didn't have a beard yet. Some kept calling for their mothers, even when they knew. She swallowed. Even when they knew nobody was coming. Jonah's eyes softened beneath the brim of his hat. I learned how to stitch skin faster than I learned to cook, she said. And I learned how to lie, too. Learned how to say, you'll be all right, even when I could feel the life go out through their fingertips. She stared into the fire, watching flames curl around the wood like it was trying to warm itself. Jonah still didn't interrupt. He just let her voice fill the shack, slow and cracked and too honest for daylight. They died with their hands in mine, Evelyn whispered. Dozens, maybe more. Her voice tightened. I remember every face. Jonah shifted slightly, the smallest motion, but the grief in her words seemed to land somewhere deep inside him. War takes more from the ones who stay alive, he said quietly. She looked at him. You fought. His jaw tightened in a way that told her she'd struck a place he kept locked away. Scoutin', trackin', not the same as you had it. But you lost someone, she whispered. Jonah's gaze drifted to the doorframe, as if memory sat out there in the dark, watching him. Everybody loses someone, he said. But the weight behind the words told her it wasn't everybody he was talking about. She didn't push. Some wounds weren't ready to be handled. She understood that more than anyone. The fire crackled again, louder this time, sending a brief flare of light across Jonah's face. In that moment, the shadows lifted just enough for her to see the tiredness beneath his eyes, the kind that came not from lack of sleep, but from too many nights keeping watch for ghosts. She lay back on the worn floorboards, pulling her coat around her. I'll try to sleep, she murmured. But the moment she closed her eyes, the world behind her lids came alive. The chase, the hands grabbing her, the flash of salt as her horse fell. She flinched at every whisper of wind against the shack's walls. Her breath hitched at the cry of a distant coyote. Her fingers jerked toward the small pocket where her brother's letter was tucked. Jonah noticed. He didn't speak, didn't move toward her. He simply rose, stepped to the doorway, and lowered himself onto an upturned crate. The rifle lay across his lap like a loyal dog, and his silhouette became a dark line between Evelyn and the night, a barrier, a promise, a man who would not let harm cross the threshold. The fire dimmed, settling into embers that glowed like old memories, refusing to die. Evelyn opened her eyes and watched his shape framed by the doorway, motionless except for the slow rise of his chest. You don't have to sit there, she whispered. Jonah kept his eyes on the darkness. I know. The simple reply wrapped around her like a blanket warmer than any she'd ever owned. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time didn't move right in that shack. The world felt held in a quiet pause, just the fire sighing, the wind brushing the boards, Jonah's steady figure, keeping the night at arm's length. Her breath finally settled. Her heartbeat slowed, and for the first time since she'd fled that mining camp, her body released everything it had held tight. Her eyes blurred, her chest shook, and Evelyn Hart finally let herself cry. Jonah didn't turn, didn't intrude, but the way his shoulders shifted, the way his hand tightened once on the rifle before relaxing again, it told her he heard every tear. The moon rose above the flats, casting pale light across the broken lakebed outside. Evelyn wiped her cheeks. Jonah sat unmoving in the doorway, and something fragile, but steady, began threading itself between them. A warmth that wasn't from the fire, a trust born not of words, but silence, the kind of silence that promised there was more to come. The first light was thin and gray, the kind that didn't warm anything, just revealed truths folks might rather leave covered. Evelyn stirred on the floorboards, stiff from the night, the scent of cooling ashes drifting around her. The shack felt colder, without the fire burning bold. Jonah had stepped outside before dawn. She'd heard the door creak, then silence. He hadn't said where he was going, but something in the way he moved, slow, deliberate, listening, told her enough. He wasn't stretching his legs. He was checking the world. Evelyn sat up, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. The dried-up lakebed outside glowed pale pink where the sunrise brushed against the salt. For a moment, it looked almost peaceful. Then Jonah stepped back through the doorway, and the peace snapped clean in half. His expression said everything before his words reached her. His jaw had locked tight, the muscle jumping once near his cheek. Dust clung to his boots. The brim of his hat hid most of his eyes, but not the tension behind them. "Tracks," he said quietly. Evelyn froze. How many too many to ignore? He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Those 4 words chilled the air more than the morning wind. She followed him outside. The light sharpened the edges of the world, the cracked lakebed, the thin line of sagebrush, the stretch of pale nothing. It also sharpened the danger. Hoofprints cut through the salt crust like deep scars, not just a few, a circle. They had ridden around the shack in the night, keeping just far enough to stay unseen, close enough to listen, close enough to decide. Evelyn's breath caught. "They were right here," she whispered. Jonah crouched near the prints, studying them with a scout's quiet precision. He touched the hoof marks with 2 fingers, then lifted his hand to the wind. "Hour old, maybe less." He murmured. "They rode light around us. 2, 3 times." "Why didn't they come in?" Evelyn asked, voice tight. "Watchin'," Jonah said. "Judgin', trying to see if you were alone or with someone." He glanced toward the shack. "My horse's tracks are covered from the wind. They didn't see him, didn't know I was here." That should have comforted her. It didn't. Evelyn's hands shook as she pulled her coat tighter. The memory of rough hands grabbing her in the mining camp surged back, dragging her breath with it. "Jonah, we can't stay here." Her voice cracked. "We can't let them corner us again." He rose slowly, dusting his palms on his trousers. "We move smart, not scared." "I'm not." She stopped. She was scared, terrified, and tired of pretending she wasn't. Jonah saw it, not in her eyes, not in her voice, but in the way she kept glancing at the horizon like she expected it to rise and swallow her whole. He softened barely. "But enough. We'll ride," he said, "but we choose the right direction." "No," she snapped, surprising even herself. "We leave now, anywhere but here." Jonah studied her long enough for her to feel exposed, then shook his head. "Not anywhere. That's how folks get killed. We need water, cover, distance." "I don't care," Evelyn said, the panic tightening her throat. "I'm not being trapped in another place with no way out." He stepped toward her, slow, steady, like approaching a wounded animal that still had teeth. "Evelyn." She backed away one step, salt crunching under her boots. "No, please just listen. I can't wait here while they ride circles around us." Jonah stopped. The distance between them felt like yards, not feet. He could have argued, could have insisted, could have ordered her the way men so often did when fear made women's voices tremble. But he didn't. He studied her one more breath, then he nodded, once a simple, solid gesture. "You lead," he said quietly. "I'll follow." Evelyn blinked, the words landing heavier than she expected. She had been given orders her entire adult life by surgeons, officers, men who thought fear was weakness, and women existed to endure it silently. No one had ever said, "You lead." Not like this. Not with sincerity. Not with respect. Her chest tightened, not from fear this time, but from something softer, something fragile that she wasn't ready to name. She swallowed. "North," she said after a moment. "I think we should head north, toward the ridge. If they tracked us from the mining camp, they expect us to run east or south." Jonah considered it. North is rough country, no clear path. That's why they won't expect it. A faint twitch touched the corner of his mouth, almost a smile, but too tired and too serious to become one. "North it is." He moved with purpose now, saddling the horses, checking straps, tightening cinches. Evelyn packed her satchel quickly, securing her brother's letter inside her coat. Her hands were steadier now, though her heart still thudded hard enough to hear. Jonah mounted first, then extended a hand to help her up. She hesitated, then placed her palm in his. His hand was warm, calloused, firm in a way that anchored rather than controlled. "You all right?" he asked. "No," she whispered, "but I'm ready." He nodded, once approval, without judgment. They rode out across the lake bed, salt cracking beneath the hooves, like distant thunder. The wind lifted the edges of Evelyn's coat and pushed her hair across her cheeks. Behind them, the abandoned shack grew smaller, shrinking against the pale morning, but the hoofprints circling it remained, carved deep into the earth, proof that danger had stood close enough to breathe the same air. As the ridge rose ahead, Evelyn glanced back one last time. The lake bed shimmered under the sun, empty and bright, but she could feel eyes, still out there somewhere, watching from behind that glare. Jonah noticed her looking. "Don't worry," he murmured. "We'll stay ahead of 'em." "Will we?" she asked quietly. Jonah didn't answer. Not because he didn't know, but because the silence between them now held more truth than assurances ever could. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and something colder, something coming. Evelyn tightened her grip on the reins. For the first time, she wasn't running alone. But the men behind them weren't giving up. Not yet, not ever, if they had their way. The ridge loomed closer, dark against the bright morning sky. And the feeling in Evelyn's chest, fear, trust, and something new making room beside them, tightened as they approached the unknown ahead. The ridge fell behind them, and the world widened into a stretch of prairie that looked like it hadn't been touched since the Lord first rolled it out. Golden grass shimmered under a pale morning sun, bending in long waves, as if the whole land were breathing slow and steady. Evelyn wished she could breathe like that. Jonah kept a steady pace ahead, not too fast, not too slow, just right for horses and nerves alike. His silhouette cut a solid line against the brightening sky, coat flapping gently in the wind, hat pulled low. He didn't talk. He rarely did, but there was comfort in that silence now. Somehow. A steadiness she could lean against without him ever knowing she needed to. Dustwell's about 4 hours out. Jonah finally said, "If the horses keep good." "Is it safe?" she asked. "As safe as any place folks forget to map," he replied. Then after a pause, "And safer than where you came from?" Heat pricked Evelyn's cheeks. She hated that the truth lived so close to shame. Hated that the memory of the mining camp still felt like hands she couldn't wash off. They rode quietly for a while, hooves thudding soft into the earth, grass parting like water. A hawk circled overhead, lazy, watchful, free. Evelyn envied it. Jonah glanced over, once, studying her briefly, then looked back to the horizon. "You hold that satchel like it'll run off if you loosen your grip. It's all I have left," she whispered. Of him, she nodded. Jonah didn't ask who him was. He didn't pry like most. Evelyn swallowed, the words catching on the way up. "My brother. Nathaniel." Jonah's posture shifted, just slightly, not pity, respect. He waited, giving her the space to fill or keep empty. She filled it. "He worked the South Ridge mines," she said. "Hard work. Worse pay. But he did it to keep the two of us fed." Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. Then the overseer claimed Nathan owed debts. Her hands tightened on the reins. Debts he made up just to push him into offering something he didn't have. Jonah didn't speak, but she felt him listening. Her voice lowered. The overseer said Nathan could make the debt disappear if he convinced his sister to visit the foreman's tent. Alone. Jonah's jaw clenched. Evelyn stared at the horizon, fighting the tremble in her chest. Nathan refused, kept refusing, fought it as long as he could. Her throat tightened. She tasted dust and memory. Then one day they found him at the bottom of Shaft 3. Said it was an accident, but the men in camp looked away whenever I passed. She blinked hard, which tells me everything I need to know. Jonah finally spoke, voice low as earth. "I'm sorry." She nodded, though she felt anything but steady. "That's why they came for me. I wouldn't belong to them, and they don't take no kindly." Wind brushed against them again, cool and gentle, like the land trying to wipe tears before they fell. But one escaped and slipped down Evelyn's cheek anyway. She didn't hide it this time. Jonah didn't offer comfort. He offered presence, a different kindness. "You told me part," he said quietly. "Not all." Her breath snagged. "I'm not ready for all." He nodded once. "That's fine. Just that. No suspicion, no pushing, no angle." It was the first time in months she felt like silence was something she could trust. They rode on, the prairie stretching ahead like a golden sea. In the distance, a line of cottonwoods marked the faint cut of a dry creek bed. Grass brushed their boots, whispering with every step. Evelyn let her shoulders lower, an inch, maybe two. It wasn't peace, not really, but a breath of something near it. "What about you?" she asked softly. "You carry ghosts too. I can hear them when you go quiet." Jonah's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement. "Everyone carries ghosts." That's not an answer. "No," he agreed. "It's not." He didn't elaborate, didn't bend to the question, but he didn't shut down either. Instead, he looked toward the horizon. eyes narrowing as if something out there meant more than the aches inside. Ghosts are loud, he murmured, but they're quieter when the land's wide enough. Something in his tone made her chest warm. Not romantic, not yet. Something gentler, like two wounded animals recognizing each other across a clearing. They rode until the sun climbed high, warming their backs, making the air shimmer where the earth met the sky. Vultures wheeled in lazy spirals. The world felt big enough to swallow the past if she let it. Evelyn found herself studying the man riding beside her, the straightness of his spine, the ease of his hands on the reins, the way he scanned the land with the eyes of someone who'd lived enough danger to stop fearing it. He looked carved from the prairie itself. "Jonah," she said softly. Thank you." "For which part?" "For being steady." He didn't take his eyes off the horizon, but she saw the faint shift in him, shoulders relaxing, jaw easing. "Ain't steady," he said, "just practiced." "That's the same thing," she whispered. "No," he said quietly. "Steady's a gift. Learned is survival." "But I'll take the compliment." For a moment, the corners of her mouth lifted, the first smile since her world shattered. Jonah noticed but didn't comment. He only flicked his reins and guided his horse toward a gentle slope, descending into the plains. "Dustwell will show up after that rise," he said. "Half-forgotten place, far from trouble, good folks. Quiet. Quiet sounds nice," she murmured. Jonah glanced her way. Quiet can be dangerous, too. Folks hear their own fears louder. She shivered not from cold, but from the truth. The prairie wind rose, brushing their faces, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant dust. Something about it felt cleansing. Or maybe she just wanted it to. Ahead, the land dipped, and the outline of a few wooden rooftops appeared faded, sun-beaten, lonely but standing. Dustwell, a place forgotten by time, maybe a place where she could remember how to be herself. Jonah slowed his horse and studied the town's silhouette. "We'll rest, resupply, keep heads down." Evelyn nodded, but the moment she looked at Dustwell's small, quiet, unassuming a knot cinched tight in her gut, something waited there, a memory, a danger, a truth she hadn't spoken yet and wasn't sure she could. Jonah turned in his saddle and caught her expression, his brow furrowed just a touch. "What is it?" Evelyn swallowed hard. I've been to Dustwell before." His eyes sharpened, and the wind seemed to hush. Dustwell wasn't much to look at from afar, just a handful of buildings crouched against the prairie wind. Roofs bowed like they were apologizing to the sky. But the closer Evelyn and Jonah rode, the more the small town breathed with life smoke rising from the blacksmith's forge. Horses tied outside the saloon, children darting past the chapel on their way to whatever mischief the morning held. The kind of place where no one asked where you'd come from, mostly because they didn't want anyone asking them, either. Jonah reined in his horse near the hitching post outside the livery stable. "We'll rest here a bit," he said. "No long faces. Dustwell don't bother nobody who keeps quiet." Evelyn nodded, though her stomach churned. She knew this place, had passed through once with her brother, back when life still had room for laughter. Now every building felt like a reminder of something lost. Mabel Drake spotted them before their boots even hit dirt. The widow Drake, as she was known, filled the boarding house's doorway like a storm front wide shoulders, gray hair in a tight coil, apron dusted with flour. "Well now," she called out, squinting at them. "You two look rode hard and left to dry." Jonah tipped his hat. "Mornin'. Mabel." that made her smile, warm but sharp. Jonah Clay. I figured you were due to wander through again. And who's this trembling little bird you brought with you? Evelyn stiffened, but Mabel's gaze wasn't judgmental. It was knowing, deeply knowing. Evelyn Hart, Jonah said, just needs a quiet room. Mabel nodded once, decisive. I've got one. Upstairs, facing the cottonwoods, clean sheets, lock on the door. Evelyn exhaled. Thank you. Mabel stepped closer, her voice lowering. A woman's fear sits in her shoulders. Yours are up to your ears. You're safe in this house, darling. Anyone tries to climb my stairs, unwanted. Well, let's just say the last man who tried never walked straight again. Against her will, Evelyn let out a shaky laugh. Mabel winked, as if that laugh was payment enough. Jonah gave Evelyn a small nod. I'll take the horses to the livery, check supplies, be back shortly. She watched him walk away, the set of his shoulders, solid, steady. She should have felt relief. Instead, a prickling unease crawled up the back of her neck. Mabel guided her upstairs. The room was small bed, wash basin, little window overlooking the dusty street, but it felt safe. Safer than the shack. Safer than the plains. Safer than any place she'd stepped foot in for weeks. Evelyn sat on the bed, releasing a breath she'd been holding since dawn. Mabel lingered at the doorway. Men following you? I presume Evelyn didn't answer. That's fine, Mabel said gently. The truth's a stubborn thing. It'll come when you're ready. With that, she closed the door, and Evelyn was alone. For a few minutes, she just sat, fingers tracing the worn fabric of her satchel. She could almost pretend the world outside was just another lonely frontier morning. Almost. Then voices drifted up through the thin walls. Loud ones. Angry ones. Evelyn moved to the window and cracked it open slightly. The saloon's doors swung as 4 men stepped inside, faces she knew too well. The overseers hired riders, the ones who had circled the shack during the night, the ones who had decided her brother's life was worth less than their pride. Her breath caught. They weren't hiding. They walked bold as brass down the main street, dust swirling around their boots. Their horses stood outside the saloon, big ensigned, mean-looking geldings with fresh sweat shining on their flanks. Evelyn ducked back from the window. They'd followed her, again. Her pulse hammered. Then voices, closer now. Inside the saloon, glass clinking, a chair scraping. One voice rising above the rest. We're looking for a woman. Dark coat, blonde hair, small scar on her chin. Passed this way, not long ago. Evelyn touched her chin involuntarily, the faint scar left from a childhood fall suddenly burning. Another voice answered calmer. Dustwell? Calm. Don't recall seeing her. You see her? The writer snapped. And you'll remember? A thud. A muffled curse. They were threatening people. Here, in daylight. Evelyn pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting her breath. She peeked again through the window's edge. Her stomach dropped. Jonah stood across the street, handing off his horse to the livery boy, unaware that danger had slipped into town like a wolf prowling behind him. He looked so steady, so sure, scanning the harnesses. Adjusting the saddle, the boy had hung crooked. He didn't see the shadow, watching him from the saloon doorway. The overseer's second in command, a tall man with a red bandana and a face carved by too many fights, leaned against the wooden post, cigarette dangling from his lips. His eyes fixed on Jonah, studying him like a problem that needed solving. Evelyn's breath hitched. He knew Jonah had been with her. He knew. And Jonah didn't even know he was being hunted. Her fingers gripped the window frame so tightly her knuckles whitened. This wasn't Jonah's fight. He wasn't supposed to be a target. He wasn't supposed to have men tracking his movements over a woman he'd barely met. This was her burden, her past, her danger. Yet there he was, shoulders squared, eyes calm, doing something as ordinary as tending to a saddle while a predator marked him. Guilt rushed into her like a wave so cold it stole her breath. She had dragged this quiet, steady man into a storm meant only for her. Into shadows he never should have stood in, into the sights of men who killed first and talked later. Jonah turned slightly, then just enough to give her a glimpse of his face and profile. Sure, untroubled, trusting the town's calm. He didn't know. He didn't know everything was about to close in. Evelyn's throat tightened painfully. A woman alone could run. A woman with a protector made a tempting target. And Jonah Clay, because of her, had just become the brightest target Dustwell had seen in years. Her breath trembled out, barely a whisper. Oh God, what have I done? Jonah didn't knock. He didn't have to. The soft scrape of his boots in the hallway told Evelyn he was coming long before his shadow filled the doorway. She stood from the small bed, hands twisting in front of her, heart pounding so loud she almost missed the gentle click of the door closing behind him. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at her, not angry, not cold, just quieter than usual, hurt in a way she hadn't expected quiet hurt. The kind that doesn't lash out, only sinks deeper. You saw him, Jonah finally said, voice low. Evelyn swallowed. Yes, saw him watching me. She nodded. And you didn't come down, not accusation. Just a fact set on the table between them. Evelyn felt her throat close. I didn't know what to do. Jonah stepped closer, slow as always, giving her enough space to choose to run or stay. His eyes were steady, searching her face without pushing. You've been holding something back, he said, since the flats, since the shack, since the prairie. She dropped her gaze. Her fingers wouldn't stop trembling. Evelyn, he said softly, I can't help you if I don't know what's chasing you. Her knees weakened. She sat on the edge of the bed before they gave completely. Jonah remained standing, hands loose at his sides, patient as stone. She reached into her coat, the leather satchel brushed against her fingertips, familiar and heavy, like it had a heartbeat of its own. She pulled it out slowly, the room suddenly too quiet, too still. This, she whispered, holding it in both hands, is why they want me. Jonah didn't move. Your brother's letter. Evelyn nodded, then shook her head. Not just a letter. Her breath broke. I didn't tell you everything. I thought keeping it small would keep you safe. Jonah's brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't speak. Evelyn drew a shaky breath and opened the satchel. Inside, wrapped in a piece of linen, was a folded sheet of paper, creased, stained at the edges, smudged with dirt and something darker. She held it like it was fragile enough to crumble. Before my brother died, she began, voice trembling. He wrote this. He hid it in my things the night he warned me to leave the camp. I didn't find it until after he was gone. Jonah took one slow step toward her. What's in the letter? She looked up, and all the strength she had left slid away. It names them. Jonah's breath stilled. Names who, the men who murdered him. There it was, the truth she'd carried like a stone in her chest. She could finally feel how heavy it had always been. Her voice cracked open. It wasn't an accident in Shaft 3. He didn't fall. She covered her mouth, fighting the sob rushing up her throat. They beat him for protecting me. Beat him because he refused to sell me to the foreman. Silence. Thick. Laced with Jonah's slow exhale. Evelyn wiped her cheeks, tears falling faster than she could catch. He wrote everything down, every threat, every name. He wrote it all so someone would believe he didn't just die. He trusted me to bring it to someone who could stop them. "And who's that?" Jonah asked gently. She swallowed. "Hard. Captain Wills. Fort Kearney. He's been investigating the mines for months. Illegal debts, forced labor, disappearances." She looked up, eyes raw. "If I get this letter to him, he'll shut the operation down. Arrest them. All of them." Jonah nodded slowly. "And if you don't, they'll keep killing men who refuse. And the next woman won't get to escape." The admission stole the air from the room. Jonah stepped closer, just enough that she could see the shift in his expression. Not pity, not horror. Something steadier. Something like understanding carved into bone. "You should have told me." Evelyn shook her head. "I thought if I kept quiet, you'd walk away before they marked you, before you stood too close." Jonah's voice softened. "Evelyn, I stood close the minute I pulled you onto my horse." Her breath caught. He sat beside her, not touching. Just enough to feel the heat of him. Warm and real. He leaned forward, forearms on his knees, staring at the worn floorboards. "That foreman," he murmured. "He the one waiting in the saloon?" "No. Worse." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He sent his men. But he'll come when they call. And he's bringing more." Jonah let that settle. The lamp flickered once, casting shadows across his face. Then he said something she didn't expect. "We'll get it to Fort Kearney." Her heart lurched. "Jonah, don't." He raised a hand, stopping her gently. "You want justice, not revenge. There's a difference. And if this letter gets to the right man, you'll have it." Tears blurred her vision. "You barely know me," she whispered. Jonah's voice was quiet, almost like he didn't mean to speak the words aloud. "I know enough." The room went still around them. The weight of truth finally laid bare. The walls seemed to listen. The wind outside hushed, as if giving them space. Evelyn felt something loosen inside a knot that had been there since the night she fled, since the moment she found her brother's handwriting smudged with sweat and blood. Jonah stood slowly, not leaving, just grounding himself. He rested one hand on the bedpost, considering her with those steady, unreadable eyes. "We leave at dawn," he said. Evelyn's breath shuddered. "It's 100 miles. I've ridden farther for men worth less." She stared at him, at the certainty in his stance, at the quiet resolve in every line of his face. For a long moment, they didn't speak. Then Jonah reached for the door, paused with his hand on the latch, and said without turning, "You ain't alone in this anymore." The door clicked softly behind him. Evelyn sat there in the quiet, letter clutched to her chest, tears cooling on her cheeks. For the first time since Nathaniel died, she didn't feel like she was running alone. The first pale wash of dawn crept over Dustwell like a shy guest, soft, cool, almost tender. Evelyn woke before it fully reached her window. Her heart was steady, her breath calm. For the first time in weeks, she had slept without hearing every creak of the walls, every hush of wind. Jonah had said they'd leave at first light. She allowed herself the smallest, rarest thing. Hope. She gathered her coat, the letter, tied back her hair with slow, deliberate fingers. The world outside smelled like morning bread from Mabel's kitchen and the beginnings of a warm day. She stepped into the hallway, boots in hand, not wanting to wake anyone. She expected to find Jonah downstairs, sitting at the table, drinking black coffee, hat tilted low, planning the safest road south, but when she stepped into the front room, it was empty. The kind of empty that didn't feel like sleep, the kind that felt like goodbye. A cold prickle slid down her spine. She turned toward the corner where Jonah had slept on a spare bedroll Mabel provided. The blanket was folded tight, the pillow smoothed, the bedroll gone, his boots were gone, his saddle, his rifle. Evelyn felt the floor tilt. "No," she whispered, though no one was there to hear it. She pushed through the front door and onto the porch. Dustwell's street still slept lamps dim, storefronts shut, one dog trotting lazily toward a water trough. The horizon blushed peach and gold, but Jonah Clay was nowhere. Evelyn stepped down into the dirt. Her boots left small prints, but beside them, nothing. He had left before first light, without a sound, without waking her, without a note, without goodbye. It hit her like a hand to the chest. She had known abandonment before. Known the moment someone she trusted walked away for good, her father, the surgeon she served under, who forgot her name the day the war ended, men who saw her as a burden, a debt, a possession, but she hadn't expected it from Jonah, not after he said she wasn't alone, not after he promised dawn, not after last night's truth. Her breath shivered. "Why?" she whispered to the empty air. The prairie wind didn't answer. A door creaked behind her. Mabel Drake stepped out, rubbing sleep from her eyes, tying her apron tighter around her waist. "You're up early," Mabel murmured. Then she saw Evelyn's face. "Oh, honey, what's happened? He's gone," Evelyn said. "Jonah. He just left." Mabel's brows lifted slightly, but not with surprise, more like resignation. Men like him don't take root easy. Evelyn shook her head. "No, he wouldn't just leave. Not like this. He said he'd help me reach Fort Kearny." Mabel's gaze drifted toward the horizon. The eastern road stretching out like a thin ribbon of dust. "Maybe he thought riding separate was safer for you." Evelyn's breath hitched, frustration flickering to life. "He didn't get to make that choice for me," before Mabel could reply. A voice called from the livery stable. "Miss Hart, you lookin' for Clay?" Evelyn spun. The young ranch hand, a boy, no older than 19, hurried toward her, straw sticking to his shirt, hair tousled from a restless night. "You saw him?" Evelyn asked, rushing over. The boy nodded. "Right before sunup. He saddled his horse in the dark, paid me extra to keep quiet till he was halfway out of town." Her stomach dropped. "Which way, Southwest Trail?" the boy said. "Not toward Kearny. Not at first. Anyway." "Why?" Evelyn whispered. The boy scratched the back of his neck, hesitant. "Said something strange. Said the men huntin' you. Well, if he left first, they'd follow him." Evelyn couldn't breathe. "He said he'd draw 'em off," the boy continued. "Said you'd have a clearer road if they were on his tail." Her jaw clenched. A sharp, hot ache rose behind her sternum part. Fury, part fear, part something too tangled to name. Mabel stepped closer, voice gentler. "Sounds to me like he didn't leave you, child. Sounds like he put himself between you and every gun pointed your way." Evelyn pressed a hand to her mouth. Jonah hadn't left to abandon her. He'd left to save her, to protect her, to shield her from a storm she'd spent months running from. But the knowledge didn't soothe her, not at all. It broke her wide open. Because if Jonah Clay had gone out there, alone into the paths of men who beat her brother to death, he might not come back. And that thought was unbearable. Her breath steadied, slow and quiet, like a fire choosing the moment it would roar. Mabel's eyes softened. "Honey, What are you going to do? Evelyn lifted her chin. What she was going to do was simple. She marched into the livery without another word, the ranch hand hurrying after her, offering a saddle before she could ask. Her hands didn't shake now. Her heartbeat didn't flutter. The fear remained, but it lived beneath something stronger. Resolve. She swung the saddle onto her horse with more strength than she knew she still possessed. Tightened every strap, checked every buckle. The boy stepped forward to help, but Evelyn shook her head. "I've got it," she said firmly. Mabel watched from the doorway, arms crossed. "You sure?" "Yes," Evelyn breathed. "I'm done letting men decide my fate. Jonah Clay wants to draw fire. Fine, but he won't do it alone." She slipped the satchel strap across her chest, securing the letter against her heart. Then she mounted, boots steady in the stirrups. The horse shifted beneath her, sensing tension but trusting her weight. Evelyn looked one last time at Dustwell. Her voice was quiet, barely more than a breath. "I'm coming for you, Jonah." And without hesitation, without fear left to hide behind, she kicked into the reins and rode hard toward the rising sun, dust rolling behind her like a second shadow, not running away, running toward, running after the one man who hadn't let her stand alone. The trail to Cedar Gulch narrowed into a hard-packed line of red dirt winding between slabs of sandstone. Evening light poured over the ridges, turning them the color of dried blood. Evelyn rode with her body pitched forward, reins clenched tight, eyes scanning every shadow the way Jonah had taught her, quiet, patient, listening for danger, hiding behind silence. She had followed hoofprints for miles, 3 sets, then one, then the same 3 returning, lighter, faster. And then somewhere near the gulch drag marks, her breath caught the moment she saw them. Deep grooves in the dirt, boot prints braced against the earth, a scuffle, and blood, dark, half-dried, tracked west. Her heart hammered painfully, but she forced herself to breathe. It was the same breath she took before cutting into a dying soldier years ago, steadying her hands, even as boys screamed beside her. She pressed her horse onward. Cedar Gulch opened like a broken jaw. Rock walls, jagged and raw, scattered juniper trees twisted by decades of harsh wind. The ravine dipped into a narrow pass where the sun couldn't reach. She dismounted quietly, tying her horse to a scrubby cedar. Her boots crunched softly in the gravel as she crept to the ridge overlooking the gulch floor. The world below her stopped. Jonah was there, tied to a juniper post, arms pulled back cruelly, legs buckled beneath him. Blood darkened the side of his face, soaked the collar of his shirt, smeared along his jaw, where someone had struck him too hard. Too often, his hat lay discarded beside a boulder, crushed, trampled. 4 men surrounded him, the overseer's riders. 2 she recognized instantly from Dustwell. 2 more she'd prayed never to see again. They laughed as Jonah tried to lift his head. One of them nudged him with a boot, tipping him sideways. He caught himself against the post, breath ragged. Evelyn's hands rose to her mouth, but she didn't make a sound. Jonah was alive. Barely alive. The man she feared losing. Not because he was the only one who had helped her, but because he had seen her pain and still stayed, was alive. For now? Her stomach twisted when she saw the overseer's second-in-command grip Jonah's jaw, lifting it so he could look directly into the dying light. "Where'd you hide the girl?" the man snarled. "You left town too damned quick for it to be coincidence." Jonah's voice was barely a growl. "Ain't telling you a thing." The man punched him hard, so hard, Jonah slumped, only the ropes holding him upright. Evelyn flinched, gripping the ridge's edge until the stone bit into her palms. Her fear didn't melt. It sharpened, moved, turned into something fierce and cold. She lowered herself onto her stomach, hiding behind a scraggly bush. The world blurred for a moment, not from tears, but from memory. She was back in a field tent outside Vicksburg, a young corporal's belly torn open, blood everywhere, her hands shaking. Then her mentor, old Dr. Trammell, gripping her wrists. Steady now. Fears allowed. Shaken's not. And she had steadied, because a life depended on it. Here, another life depended on her. Evelyn wiped the grit from her eyes and focused on the men below. The 4 riders had pitched a small fire. Their horses grazed idly near the ravine wall. A rifle leaned against a boulder. A lantern hung from a low branch, swinging gently in the rising breeze. They weren't expecting company. They weren't expecting her. Evelyn's pulse surged. A plan began forming, rough, reckless, but real. She scanned the gulch, mapping each rock, each shadow. Her mind sorted distance, like she was back on a battlefield number of men. Weapons visible, escape routes. She spotted Jonah's knife lying near one of the saddlebags. His revolver was tucked into a rider's belt, his rifle nowhere in sight. Her breath hissed quietly. The sun dropped lower, shadows deepening. One of the men tossed a handful of twigs into the fire, sparks flaring. Another opened a can of beans and cursed when he burned his fingers. They were relaxed, confident, thinking they had time. They didn't. Evelyn felt something shift inside her chest, something steady, fierce, unflinching. Jonah had risked everything to lead these men away from her. Now it was her turn. She backed away from the ridge, heart drumming hard, but controlled. She moved with purpose, the same careful precision she once used when guiding a needle through torn flesh. Her breath steadied. Her hands stopped shaking. The dusk bled into the ravine, turning every rock into a hiding place. She tugged her coat tight, checked the satchel strap, and picked up a fist-sized stone, feeling its weight, its shape, its promise. Jonah's life wasn't slipping away tonight, not if she could help it, not while she still had breath. By the time the last sliver of sun sank behind the ridge, Evelyn had chosen her path down the slope quiet, dangerous, and sure. Her last glance before descending saw Jonah raise his head, blood dripping from his lip, eyes searching the dark. He didn't know she was there. He didn't know she had come for him. But he would. Soon, Evelyn tightened her grip on the stone and stepped into the ravine. Night settled over Cedar Gulch like a heavy blanket, muffling sound, swallowing color. The men around the fire had grown loud, laughing in that cruel, careless way. Men laugh when they think no one alive can touch them. Their faces glowed orange in the firelight. Their shadows stretched tall and crooked across the ravine walls. To the north, beyond their circle of light, Evelyn crouched behind a low swell of sagebrush. Her breath fogged faintly in the cooling air, her fingers numb from gripping the small tin of kerosene she'd found near her horse's pack. Jonah's ragged breaths drifted across the stillness, not loud, but enough to twist her stomach with urgency. She scanned the gulch again. 4 horses, 4 men, 1 chance. Violence would get her killed, but chaos she could use. Years ago, in a war tent lit by lanterns and screams, she'd learned that fire, when controlled, could save lives as easily as it took them. She had burned infected bandages to stop disease from spreading. She had used smoke to keep wounded boys calm, half convinced it hid them from death's approach. Tonight, she prayed it would hide her. Evelyn scooped dry brush, into a small pile just beyond the gulch's rim. Her hands worked quickly, silently, twigs, sage, brittle grass. Then she poured a thin line of kerosene, tracing it outward like a fuse. A sound bounced up from below, one of the men kicking Jonah again. Evelyn stiffened, then forced herself to breathe. She struck her match. The flare was tiny, a pinprick of gold against the deep blue night. She shielded it with her hand, lowering it to the brush. The fire caught instantly. It smoldered first, then cracked, then crawled along the kerosene trail with a soft, hungry whisper. Smoke billowed upward, thick and gray, curling around the ridge before spilling down into the gulch. Below, the horses lifted their heads, ears flicking, nostrils flaring. One stamped nervously. The men continued laughing, oblivious. The fire grew, not wild, not racing, just enough. Evelyn had measured the distance carefully. The gulch walls would choke the flames before they could leap. She had ensured it burned only one direction away from camp, toward Bear Stone, but the smoke drifted exactly where she needed it to. Down, around, into the men's firelight. What in hell, one of them muttered, coughing. Another stood, squinting. Smoke, the horses panicked first. A squeal tore through the gulch as one reared, ripping its reins free. Another jerked sideways, crashing into a saddlebag. A third bucked wildly, nearly trampling a man who lunged for the reins. Shouts exploded, curses, the clatter of hooves, confusion. Evelyn moved. She slid along the ravine wall, hugging the shadows. Smoke stung her eyes, but she kept going, knife clutched tight. The ground trembled as a loose horse bolted past, kicking up dust. No one saw her, not yet. Jonah's head hung low, barely conscious. His wrists were bound behind the post. The rope pulled so tight it had cut into his skin. She reached him, breath ragged, and touched his cheek. "Jonah," she whispered. His eyelids fluttered. "Evel, I'm here. Stay awake." She sawed at the rope, blade shaking more than she wanted to admit. The fibers frayed, then snapped. Jonah slumped forward, and she caught him under the arm, dragging him upright. But footsteps pounded toward them, heavy, fast, too close. Evelyn spun, knife raised, a gun barrel pointed back at her. The smoke parted just enough for her to see the face behind it, young, maybe 19, cheeks hollow from hunger, eyes sharp, despite the soot smearing them. His hat was too big for him. His coat hung off his shoulders. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then the boy's eyes widened. "Nurse Hart," he whispered. Her grip faltered. The world blurred. A different night flickered in her memory. Rain hammering a canvas tent. A boy, half this size on a stretcher, gut torn open by shrapnel, crying for his mother. She had held his hand as she worked, refusing to let him slip away. He blinked hard, disbelief turning into something like awe. "I thought you died at Shiloh. You lived," she breathed. He lowered his pistol, his voice cracked with old grief. "Because of you." Behind him, the other riders shouted for him. "Billy, hurry up." He didn't look back. He stepped aside. His whisper was raw and urgent. "Run!" Evelyn didn't waste a breath. She hauled Jonah forward, slinging his arm over her shoulder. Jonah tried to stand on his own and nearly fell. She dragged him faster. Behind them, Billy fired 2 wild shots toward the sky, shouting, "They're heading north. I see him, he was covering for them." Smoke thickened, curling around their legs as they stumbled through the chaos. Evelyn found Jonah's freed horse, first the animal snorting, terrified, but not bolting. She grabbed the reins, shoved Jonah up with strength she didn't know she had. "Hold on." she ordered. He gripped the saddle horn, swaying. Evelyn, he rasped. No talking. She mounted behind him, kicked the horse hard. They burst through the smoke like a shadow breaking loose from the earth, racing into the night. Behind them, the gulch echoed with shouts. Spread out, they went that way find 'em. But the brush fire fanned wider. Smoke swallowed their trail, and Billy's voice rose above the others, yelling wrong directions as loudly as he could. Evelyn didn't look back. Not at the fire, not at the men, not at the boy she once saved who had now saved her. She only leaned into Jonah's back, feeling his weight, hearing the weak rasp of his breath, praying it would not be his last. The desert swallowed them, mile after mile. Jonah slumped, Evelyn tightened her hold, and far behind them, in the thick smoke of Cedar Gulch, a debt paid years ago still glowed like an ember, small, but bright enough to keep them alive. Night had nearly bled into morning by the time Evelyn found a high ledge of red stone jutting over the desert floor. The wind here was gentler, rolling along the sandstone ridges with a low humming sound, like a tired hymn. She guided the horse beneath a jut of rock that offered shade from the rising light, then coaxed Jonah down from the saddle. He hit the ground harder than he meant to, knees buckling. She caught his arm, but he pushed a tight breath through his teeth, face pale beneath the soot. Easy, she murmured. He let her help him this time. No protest, no stubbornness. Just trust, quiet and tired. She settled him against the warm red wall of stone and began checking his ribs with practiced hands. Beneath his shirt, she found bruises, dark, sprawling things that flowered across his skin like midnight stains. He didn't complain, though he grimaced when she pressed along the fractured rib. Thought I'd taken worse, he muttered. You have, she answered, but it doesn't mean this won't hurt. The makeshift bandage she wrapped around his torso held firm, and he exhaled slowly, as though the pain was finally unclenching. The sky was beginning to glow by then, not gold, not pink yet, just that faint pale blue that comes before everything else. The desert below them stretched wide and empty, dotted with sagebrush that caught the first hints of light. Jonah watched it all silently. Evelyn watched him. You should drink, she said softly, offering the canteen. He took it with shaking fingers. The water sloshed inside, catching a bit of dawn in it, and he drank as though each swallow steadied him 1 inch at a time. When he finished, he leaned his head back against the rock and finally spoke. I didn't mean to scare you, he said. You did, she replied. When I woke and you were gone, I thought... She didn't finish. Jonah rubbed a thumb across his brow. I figured if they followed me, they'd leave the town alone. Leave you alone. He paused, a dry laugh catching in his throat. Didn't exactly go the way I planned. They would have killed you. He didn't deny it, just stared at the spreading dawn like a man weighing old memories. For a long moment, they listened to the quiet wind brushing sand, a distant hawk calling. Then Jonah's voice came low, roughened at the edges. Evelyn, there's something you ought to know, something I should have said long before now. She stilled, sensing the heaviness gathering behind his words. I left home once, he started, long before I ever took work scouting for the army. I left a woman, my wife, Clara, and our boy. The air thinned around them. Evelyn didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. She died of fever. Jonah continued. Both of them did. It moved fast. I was out on a 3-week scout assignment. I kept thinking if I'd stayed, if I'd seen the signs, if I'd been there. His voice cracked. Maybe they'd have lived. Evelyn felt the truth in him, the way guilt could carve a man hollow from the inside. You didn't fail them, she whispered. He looked away sharply. That's not how it feels. Jonah, she said, reaching for his hand. He didn't pull away. A fever took them, not you. He swallowed, eyes fixed on their joined hands, her fingers small against his calloused ones. I saw you run from Dustwell, he said softly. Saw the fear on your face. All I could think was, God help me. Not again. Not another person I let down. That's why I left. Not to abandon you, but because I thought if I stayed close, you'd end up like them. Her thumb brushed lightly over the scars on his knuckles. I'm not your past. He closed his eyes at that. As though the words struck something tender deep inside, she shifted closer, her voice low but steady. You didn't fail me, Jonah Clay. Every time I needed you, you were there. He opened his eyes, and in them she saw the truth. A man who had carried too much grief for too long, who had spent years wandering the wasteland of his own guilt. Evelyn, he said quietly, I don't know how to be what you need. She smiled faintly. You don't need to know. You only need to ride with me. He let out a breath, half disbelief, half relief. Her gaze dropped to the satchel at her feet, the letter that had started everything. Her brother's last words, his warning, his death written in trembling ink. I have to finish this, she said, lifting the satchel. Fort Kearney is still 100 miles south. Captain Wills is waiting for proof. She met his eyes. If we stop now, if we turn back, my brother died for nothing. Jonah didn't hesitate. Then we ride. Her breath hitched slightly at the certainty in his voice. Not a question, not an obligation. A vow. She helped him stand. He leaned once on her shoulder, then straightened, jaw set, pain in his ribs sharp, but not enough to sway him. The sun broke over the horizon, then bright red, spilling fire across the sandstone like a blessing. Jonah looked at it, then at her. Evelyn Hart, he said softly, I'll see this through. Whatever comes. The desert wind rose, pulling at her hair, tugging gently at his coat, as if sealing the promise between them. She nodded, heart thudding with something fierce and fragile all at once. Together, she said. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture small but steady. Then the two of them walked toward the waiting horse, toward the long road south, toward danger and truth and perhaps something more, but behind them, down in the desert basin, a single trail of smoke still curled upward from Cedar Gulch, faint, distant, and moving. They were being hunted still, and dawn only made them easier to see. Evelyn paused, sensing it. Storm on the horizon? The past catching up? She tightened her grip on the satchel. Jonah rested a hand on the horse's saddle, looking south with her. Neither spoke. Both knew the fight wasn't done. The desert wind carried their silence across the red stones, an unfinished chord waiting for its reckoning. They reached Fort Kearney near midday, the sun standing high and white-hot above the parade grounds. The wind carried sand across the open field, brushing against the flag that snapped sharply atop the wooden post. Soldiers moved in steady rhythms, practiced, purposeful with boots striking the hard-packed earth. Evelyn drew a deep breath as they approached the gate. She had imagined this moment 100 times since her brother's death. In each imagining, she thought she would feel triumph, or fury, or collapse under the weight of grief. But now, riding beside Jonah in the dust and wind, she felt something else entirely. Steadiness. Like the world beneath her feet had finally stopped tilting. A sentry raised a hand. "State your business," Jonah answered, voice low but firm. "We're here for Captain Wills." The soldier nodded and shouted for a runner. Moments later, a stocky man with a trimmed gray beard and the eyes of someone who had seen too much war walked out of the main quarters. Captain Wills. He paused when he saw Evelyn saw the leather satchel clutched to her chest. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat, "you look like someone who's come a long way to find me." "I have," she answered. Jonah dismounted first, then helped her down. She felt his steady hands at her waist, gentle but grounding. When her boots touched the earth, she stepped forward toward the captain. Her heart thudded once, hard, against her ribs. "This belonged to my brother," she said, passing him the satchel. "His name was Nathaniel. He worked the western mines. He died protecting me from the men who murdered him." Captain Will's eyes softened not with pity, but with understanding, the kind born from too many folded flags and too many notifications delivered at dawn. He opened the satchel carefully, pulled out the letter, read the first few lines silently. The wind hushed around them. When he looked up again, his face had changed, jaw set, duty rising like a shield behind his eyes. "These names," he said quietly. "I know 2 of them. And if this letter is accurate, there'll be a federal inquiry, likely more." Evelyn felt her chest loosen just a little. "Will they be held accountable?" "Yes." "Ma'am," Will said, "but it won't be fast. Justice out here seldom is." She nodded, letting the truth settle without breaking her spine. Slow justice was still justice. Jonah stepped up beside her, close enough that she felt the heat of him. Captain Wills looked between them, then added, "I'll send riders within the hour. You've done the right thing bringing this." Evelyn bowed her head. "Once." "Thank you, Captain." When they turned to leave, she expected the old ache of unfinished things to twist inside her. But instead, she felt something strange, something quiet, something like release. They saddled up their horses and rode out through the gate. The wind had picked up, brushing against the cottonwoods near the fort, scattering the first hints of winter chill across the air. Jonah adjusted his coat collar, watching the land stretch southward in rolling plains. He glanced sideways at her. "You did it. We did," she corrected. His lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile, but carried that same warmth she'd begun to depend on. They rode until Fort Kearney was only a speck behind them, dust rising like memory, faint and harmless. A few miles on, a lone buckboard wagon creaked toward them on the road. As it drew closer, Evelyn blinked in surprise. Mabel Drake sat on the driver's seat, reins in hand, shawl pulled tight across her shoulders, her hair, pinned neatly, glinted under the sunlight. "Mabel," Evelyn called. "Well now," the widow said, pulling the horse to a stop. "If it isn't the 2 most hard-headed souls I know." Evelyn hurried to her side. "What are you doing all the way out here?" "Brought supplies," Mabel said, nodding to the back of the wagon. "Figured the army boys could use warm bread and someone who knows how to season beans." She leaned forward slightly, lowered her voice. "And I hoped I'd run into you." From the wagon, she produced a wrapped bundle cloth tied with simple twine. "Take it," she said, placing it in Evelyn's hands. "Food, salve for bruises, and a bit of peppermint for your nerves. Lord knows you've earned it." Evelyn swallowed hard, touched. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't," Mabel said. "Just keep riding. Folks like you don't get many chances at a new life. Best take this one before it changes its mind." Mabel looked at Jonah next. Her gaze softened, but stayed sharp as a needle. "You take care of her. Jonah Clay." His response came without hesitation. Yes, ma'am. I intend to. The widow nodded once, satisfied. Good. Then I'll see you both when you wander back north someday. She snapped the reins, wagon rattling off toward the fort. Evelyn stood still until the dust settled behind her, then looked down at the bundle in her arms. Warmth, kindness, human connection, things she'd thought the desert had long since forgotten. Jonah touched her elbow. We should get moving. She nodded and climbed into the saddle. He mounted beside her, guiding his horse a bit closer than before, not crowding, just near. The prairie opened before them, endless golden swells dotted with sage and the faint shimmer of heat. Far to the south, the sky darkened at the edges with the promise of coming winter. Evelyn inhaled deeply, letting the wind carry away the last echoes of fear. So, Jonah said quietly, eyes on the horizon, where to now? She smiled, small but certain. South, maybe farther than that. Maybe we just keep going a while. Jonah chuckled, under his breath. Reckon I could manage that. Side by side, they nudged their horses forward. The first chill of winter brushed their backs. Dry grass whispered under the hooves. Their tracks pressed lightly into the earth, two lines sharp at first, then fading as the wind swept over them, but not gone. Never truly gone, just like the people they'd lost, just like the choices that had rebuilt them, just like the fragile, growing bond between them, quiet and steady as dawn. As the prairie swallowed them in its wide, waiting arms, Jonah looked over once more. You ready? He asked. Evelyn turned her face into the wind. Yes, she said, for the first time, I truly am. And together, they rode south, two figures stitched against the vastness, leaving behind a world that had hurt them, yet moving toward one that might finally let them heal. Sometimes, healing begins where we least expect it, out on a lonely road, beside a stranger we never planned to trust, or in the quiet moments after fear has finally loosened its grip. Evelyn and Jonah didn't set out to save each other. They were just two wounded souls trying to outrun the shadows of their past. But somewhere between the salt flats and the long road south, they found something gentler than survival. They found a reason to breathe again. Maybe that's the quiet truth this story leaves behind, that strength isn't always loud, and courage isn't always a gun drawn in the dark. Sometimes it's choosing to get back on the horse when your legs are shaking. Sometimes it's letting someone walk beside you when you've spent years believing you had to walk alone. And maybe, just maybe, our deepest wounds aren't meant to harden us. They're meant to open a space where someone else's light can finally reach in. Wherever you're listening from tonight, I hope you find a bit of that light too. Thank you for being here with us tonight, for sitting beside this story, for letting the wind, the dust, and the quiet courage of two wandering souls ride with you for a little while. Every like, every share, every subscribe isn't just support for the channel. It's a way of keeping these gentle, human stories alive. Stories that remind us of kindness, of second chances, of the quiet strength we sometimes forget we still carry. Thank you for helping us pass that light along